Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Elite Health and Wellness Show. I am Boomer Cornwell, one of the co founders and owners of Elite Health Online Telemedicine. With us today, we have Shane Rusk with one of our vendor pharmacy partners, Pharmaceo. Shane, how you doing today?
Doing great, man. Thanks for
Good.
having me again.
Man, so what we're going to do today, absolutely. What we're going to do today is we're going to go down a little bit different road. We're going to kind of shift gears just a little bit. And we were talking about this a few minutes ago, but with this being November, there's a lot more than just Thanksgiving on the horizon. And so I want to let Shane kind of take the ball here and run with this concept of Movember, which is a time where we kind of reflect and think about mental health issues, particularly as it pertains to men, which is not something that we do enough of, in my opinion. I don't think we talk about it enough. I certainly think that we don't address it enough. But some of that could just be because as men, we don't typically talk about these kinds of things, right? We just kind of go about our day and run our business and lead our families, and we don't really talk about these kinds of things. So I've got some stats I want to go over, but I know you have some thoughts. So where do you want to go with this, man?
Yeah, so like you said, the concept, there's a connotation that surrounds men's mental health. And statistically speaking, way less men seek counseling or discuss issues or problems than women. So knowing that, we're already at a disadvantage when it comes to mental health and awareness and things that can benefit us just in our daily grind, the stressors of life. But Movember as a whole is an awareness month dedicated to growing a mustache for fun, to get people to support and donate or ask you about why you have that mustache. You can direct them to certain things that fund it. You can go to Movember.com. You can find local resources too, or even charitable events that might be going on in your area. But it's also research funding for cancers, and some of the prominent cancers with men specifically are going to be prostate and testicular.
Wow. Okay. Well, I did not know about that cancer aspect of it. That was pretty cool. So I came up with a few stats here, and I was just reading online. Some of the stuff was a little bit jarring, to be totally honest with you. That I saw 49% of our population is made up of males. But males make up 80% of the suicide rate in this country related to things like stress, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, which I know you're going to get into in a couple of minutes. If you extrapolate that out over time, one male commits suicide every 14 minutes in the US. That's a very dangerous and disturbing statistic, man. It really is. Cognitive decline, issues with PTSD, we know that can begin as early as 40. It tends to accelerate once we're beyond the age of 50. Typically, like we say, on average, more men will experience cognitive decline versus women. It's about 12% versus 9%. And typically, like the first reported, sign or symptom of this is something like forgetting something as innocuous as a birthday of somebody that might be important, or maybe they had an appointment and they completely missed it, something like that. Just these kind of little misnomers that maybe we tend to kind of dismiss, if you will, as, oh, I'm tired, I'm really stressed out, I'm busy, I've got a lot of things on my mind. Well, that may be true, but if we see that things like that are occurring a little bit more kind of accelerated pace, if you will, maybe we need to kind of think about this and be a little bit more cognizant about this. If we don't address these things, we will see it develop into other aspects like Alzheimer's or dementia, senility, Parkinson's, these neurological disorders that we tend to get a little bit later in life. So,
Correct.
I know also too, and we'll get into some of the product in just a couple of minutes. In fact, we can do that now. I really want to go down, and I want you to give us a lot of good meat on the bone here, if you will, right? Because there's a product that you guys have called DIHEXA, and I've never taken it in full transparency. We have a lot of our patients, our prescribers do recommend it for some patients. So I can't give any anecdotal evidence myself of its efficacy, but talk a little bit about DIHEXA. Give us, first of all, kind of a big 30,000 foot view, if you will,
Sure.
of what is it? Is it a peptide? Is it a neurotropic? So tell us what it is, and then let's go into what it does.
Sure. Not to get into too much nitty gritty detail, but it is an oligopeptide. And that's just a fancy term that means very short amino acid chain. Okay. All in all, the shorter the amino acid chain, the more direct the activity level is statistically. Okay. So it tends to correlate. A longer amino acid or longer protein tends to have multi-functions within the body. A shorter one is very specific. So this one's going to be specific to neuroglial protection and neuron communication. So think at the synapse, right? In our brain specifically, or the CNS, we have these nerves that want to send messages and communicate. When that's lacking, or we lose brain cells, we lose activity, we start to lose short-term memory. That's the first thing noticed. If it starts getting into long-term memory, that's a real problem. So the diseases you were talking about, right, like Parkinson's or dementia as a whole, as that disease progresses, it's not just short-term memory that's lost. You start losing long-term memory and forgetting who people are, right? And as you said, significant dates and things that would have had a special place in your heart. So DIHEXA is an application to protect brain function, specifically when it comes to neuroglial protection because of inflammation. And we can talk about that as well if you'd like.
No, let's do it. I would love to. So one of the things we were talking about a little bit before we got in here was the onset of things like the traumatic brain injury. PTSD, we see that, a lot with our veterans coming back from the battlefield in the military. Are they, or, somebody with high contact sports like a football or something like that, do you see a little bit more propensity for these people to develop these types of issues due to the traumatic brain injury, or maybe even the PTSD, which may not be a traumatic brain injury, it's a traumatic event, right, that just keeps replaying. And it causes, I think, a lot of the same processes as, say, a brain injury would.
Yeah.
Right.
So neural inflammation, microglial activation, right, which is inflammation at the brain level. And we have these natural protectors, and they're called brain-derived neurotrophic factors. And DIHEXA actually is 7 times more potent in activity in helping with neural communication and regeneration than our own natural derived neurotrophic factor.
Oh, wow.
So if our body is operating at a speed of 1, you can get a speed 7 by taking something like DIHEXA. When it comes to TBIs and physical sports, someone who's been concussed in their life, anything like that, people suffering from PTSD, not only do TBIs relate to endocrine disruption, which means you're going to have a lower output of natural hormone production, like testosterone. So when that happens, back to mental health and awareness, it's not just loss of brain function, right, and clarity, mental clarity and cognitive function. You also, if you lower your endocrine output, your testosterone, you lower your estrogen. And as we've discussed, when you lower your estrogen, you lower your serotonin production, which is the feel-good hormone.
Right.
So when that's lowered, then you can expect a mild depressive state.
Right.
So most men with low T have mild depressive symptoms, and people with PTSD specifically exacerbate that symptom. And they tend to have more of a depressive disorder. Right. Hence the reason the suicide rate is extremely high in people that are ex-military and first responders.
Really? So what does that look like if we go into, we can get into a little bit of a testosterone discussion here too if you want, but for somebody who starts going into like a mild depressive state like that, what are some signs, if there are any, that we need to kind of look for or be aware of? Because having family members with PTSD, I can tell you that, if I think back on it, I can kind of identify that mild depressive state. Then I can see over time how it got worse and worse and worse into these, kind of angry and violent outbursts. It was drastically affecting their job and their family, which I want to get into an anecdotal example here in just a minute.
Sure.
But let's just kind of break off just a second and kind of think about, is this something that people should think about taking just kind of proactively, or do we need to kind of wait for certain signs and symptoms to show up?
This is something anyone could take proactively. If anyone's noticing a loss in memory, short-term specifically, that's, again, one of the first signs. Where'd I put my keys, right? What was I talking about? Where's my cell phone? Have you seen my cell phone? Is it so-and-so's birthday today? Whatever that may be, right? If you start not recalling things that would otherwise be important, or who leaves without their phone, right? If you can't find your phone. So I don't know about you, but it freaks me out. So at the end of the day, short-term recall, conversation, forgetting a word, how to do routine math. There's all kinds of signs. You just want to stay ahead of it. So to be proactive in taking DIHEXA is a great complement to deter, right, the onset of some of the disease states we said. So microglial, or the inflammation of the brain, right, can be caused by multiple things. Even the foods we eat. Alcohol consumption. Great point. So all of that, if that's turned on and activated, it's going to create an increased incident report of Parkinson's, ALS, right? Back to,
Oh, gosh,
head
yeah.
trauma,
ALS.
Huntington's disease, a form of dementia, MS. Think of a lot of hyperinflammatory disease states that's linked to this.
Really?
Hmm.
Interesting. Based on some of those symptoms you described, I think I have a business partner that might need to try some DIHEXA
Yeah,
because he
yeah.
forgets his phone and where he's at half the time.
But
So
back to you. Sorry, not to deter
Yeah, go ahead.
from detract from the question you said was, what are some signs to look for outside of the memory loss, mild depressive state? If someone's psychosocially withdrawing, like a friend who used to be socially active
Yeah.
and want to be involved is more recluse, not answering the phone, and withdrawing from communication or not wanting to be active and go to dinners or, have fun. They don't find the humor in life as much, right? That'd be the obvious one. But yeah, withdrawing or seeming more anxious, more nervous than they used to be. All of that can be things that prelude to a mild depressive state.
that's really interesting that you bring that up, Shane, because those last few things you just mentioned. I mean, I could name almost anybody in my life that kind of tends to display some of those characteristics, myself included, right? I mean, it's one of those things where oh, I don't feel like answering the phone, I'm too busy or whatever, I'm kind of withdrawn, and I don't realize that I'm just kind of not as interested in maybe answering my phone as much anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe sometimes my wife will tell me, and she even says the same thing about her dad, that hey, you're just not really enjoying things as much anymore. And I really don't realize it. And I bet that most people, men and women both, don't realize necessarily that that's the case. They can't see it. We have to have a loved one. We have to have somebody who cares about us tell us that they're noticing these types of things in us, right?
Correct.
So on the kind of the proactive side of it, though, I mean, we talked about signs and symptoms, but a couple of weeks ago, my business partner and I had a good meeting with a gentleman who brought this up, and this guy, he's a patient of ours, and really opened our eyes with some information that we had not thought about previously, and it was this idea that yes, we all want to look good, we want to feel good, and clearly he hits the gym. I mean, he puts you and me to shame. I mean,
Sure.
But that wasn't where he was going with this. He said, you guys, I really think are missing the boat with some of these products that really address the mental capacity and cognitive ability of your patients. And he related it specifically to kind of the high performance individual, right? Not necessarily in terms of wealth, but just in terms of what they're responsible for on a daily basis, right? So these guys that are making big decisions, and he specifically referenced somebody who buys and sells companies for a living. And he said there's a whole, world out there of people, men and women alike, that everybody wants to look good, everybody wants to feel good, but that's not even what they're necessarily looking for. They're looking for something that's going to keep them sharp. It's going to keep them on their toes. It's going to keep them engaged. And he recommended that we really focus on this product DIHEXA, and almost even develop a like a promotional campaign around how to get this out, get the word out around it. So talk a little bit about, I mean, so for the guy or the girl that doesn't necessarily have these symptoms, is this something you would even recommend? And maybe relate it to kind of the natural aging process, right? I mean, as we get a little bit older, we're not necessarily, even if we don't think we have symptoms, and we may not, there's going to be a natural aging process that may warrant taking something like this.
For sure, yeah. Let's talk about the general public. Something we can't stop is aging, right? So a natural process of aging is just loss of certain healthy cells and cellular turnover. That's why we lose bone mineral density if we don't take something like TRT or growth hormone support, and muscle mass, sarcopenia, right? All that can happen. It's no different with your brain. Remember, we're ridden with toxins now. The foods we eat, high sugar, phenols, etc., hyperinflammatory foods, processed foods, bromine toxicity. I mean, the list goes on. Okay, we drink alcohol. Okay, most of us do. And so even if we're limited in that, the times that we do, it's going to cause brain cell loss. So if you look at it as a whole, anyone and everyone can take this that wants to stay sharp mentally, that wants to improve mental capacity, and help with cellular communication in the brain. When we have a hyperinflammatory state, that links us again to a statistic, okay? So most of y'all are probably aware now because it's discussed, but there's 350,000 new cases per year of diagnosed dementia, including Alzheimer's. Outside of that, if you look at statistics for 2050, we will be at a tripled chance of having a form of dementia.
And why is that?
Well, again, I don't think our food's getting any better. I don't think we're taking better care of ourselves. And stress. Don't overlook it, guys. So cortisol is a hormonal response to stress. If you can line up 10 people in a room and ask them, do they get stressed every day? 10 people are going to say yes. Absolutely. They feel a form of stress at some point during their day. So knowing that, cortisol is responsible for literally stopping neuroregeneration. So I can't, again, list one person who says, I live a stress-free life every day. It doesn't happen. They might go stress-free on some days, but there's still stressors in their life, right? So if we know that's a factor and that stops neuroregeneration, you have to take something like DIHEXA or do something or cut out foods and alcohol or whatever and have no fun, right? And so knowing that stress is a part of our daily lifestyle, this is something that anyone and everyone can take. Now, also looking at people that are already afflicted with some of the disease states we discussed, this is something that won't necessarily regress or cure the disease state, but it can stop it from progressing any further at the same rate.
Really?
So it can be preventative in the onset of a dementia or something that's forming.
Okay. Let's talk just a second, because you brought up a good point about cortisol, which again is one of those. It's one of those things I don't think we may not know enough about it, but we certainly don't focus enough on it, because the cortisol is both good and bad.
Correct.
And it has a natural cycle, right? I mean, it helps you wake up in the morning, it helps you go to sleep at night, it helps you hopefully control stress during the day. Typically what we do, when we get up in the morning is we do things like our coffee, which we're artificially trying to affect our own cortisol levels. We don't necessarily know that we're doing that, but we are, right? And it is one of our stress hormones, right? So you talked about it, but let's spend another minute or so on it, because it's very, very important to talk about the role of cortisol and stress. It honestly could be related to some of why we're not getting the results that we want, right? I mean, I'm hitting the gym every day and I think I'm eating pretty good and I'm doing my HRT therapy, but man, I can't, my anxiety is up and I'm still stressed. And I, if I don't hit the gym really, really hard, I feel really stressed. And, so talk a little bit about kind of what a natural cortisol cycle should look like, the good and the bad, right? But then specifically the bad, what is it going to do to negatively affect us?
So all in all, cortisol is a natural thing that we do need because it actually potentiates our body's compensatory factors.
Meaning what?
Like GH release as one, testosterone release. So you said cortisol helps us get up in the morning. It's a stressor to be woken up out of sleep, right? So that stress response of I got to get up and get going causes a hormonal output to get you going. So if you're getting up out of bed, you have a GH release in the morning along with a testosterone surge if you're not taking a TRT form. So naturally, let's just say you're 25 years old. Growth hormones released, testosterone's released, you get up, right? Which is why you can have those late nights and go out and do things and get up and go take the test and feel fine.
You can't do that at 46 anymore, man.
No, you can't. You can't. It gets a little harder, right? And so when stress or cortisol starts to increase in ratio, and you have less hormonal output to guard against it, you feel the effects of it. So cortisol is good in the amount it's supposed to be there. When you have elevated cortisol, or you have continuous or more frequent cortisol levels, it increases, like you said, psychosocial disorders, anxiety, nervousness, disruptions in sleep. It gives you an increased occurrence of fat storage and fat growth.
That's a big one.
Okay. Yeah. So think about, I'm in the gym, like you said, I'm working out, I'm doing these things. I just can't lose the weight. You probably have adrenal fatigue. You probably have a cortisol issue, right? As a contributing factor, not the only one, but I guarantee you it's there.
Yeah, I think so. And it's one of the things that, quite candidly, my brother is kind of dealing with it a little bit too, right? I mean, he's not obese by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, he's a little bit taller than me, bigger than me, more muscular than I am.
So he's taller than me.
Right. That's kind of a low bar there.
Yeah.
So no, but and he talks about that because it's one of the things that his doctor recommended too was, hey, we've got to take a look at this cortisol level because he does work in a high impact, high stress environment, right? It's the financial world. I mean, it's the most heavily regulated world we live in. And getting that, and of course too, he's responsible for a family, right? And I mean, he's getting older. He's older than I am. So, all these things contribute to this. And I think it's one of the things that we don't look at. I think we just kind of dismiss it, or like I say, we don't even know about it necessarily. So enough about that. Let's talk a little bit about the form of administration. So for DIHEXA, are we looking at an injection? Is this a pill, or how do we take it?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. Most common is a pill. It's bioavailable orally, so you don't have to do anything like an injection. There is a cream base you can find and source. If you do that, you want to rub it near the carotid, actually, for absorption. But if you take this orally, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and gets its activity exactly where we want it.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Is it one time a day administration, or what are we looking at?
It can be. You can also split the dose, but there's no reason not to take it all at once. And it varies person to person. So how we take this, or how you dose, is everyone should start around 10 milligrams. I always say start the minimal therapeutic value and then work your way up, because it's a lot easier to go up, but it's a lot harder to go down, right? So find your happy medium. Most respond very well to 20 milligrams. There are people that you take up to 30 or 40 milligrams per day. That gets a little costly, so I would try to avoid that if at all possible.
Why would they need to go that high?
Well,
in other words, is it based on like physical size necessarily, or just ability to absorb? Or
everyone's different. Yeah, it's a good question. It's not the effectiveness of DIHEXA itself; it's more the resistance of the person. And so some are very unfortunate non-responders, just like anything, right? You have people that swear Tylenol works for them, but Advil doesn't, and vice versa.
Okay.
So some people, most, will take DIHEXA and notice it in 60 to 90 days. They'll see improvements in recall and quick conversational. They're now more witty. They've got quips back, all that. They're just turned on. It's like a light switch, right? As they claim. So an anecdotal review is, do you feel all of a sudden the day is brighter? Like things are just more clear. It's crisp, right? In 60, really 2 to 3 months. If not, up your dose. Okay. And keep going. But if you're not noticing anything and you went to 30, 40 milligrams, you're the very unfortunate low percent non-responder.
Okay. Oh, wow. And that's, how much did you say? What percentage of?
We don't know statistically. We just know that the masses, well over 90% of the people that we're treating respond very well to it.
So I want to go back a little bit, because you touched on something, and you may have to repeat it a little bit. But
sure.
First of all, I guess let's start with this. You said if somebody doesn't see results in 30, 60, 90 days, up the dose. So just as a baseline expectation, if I start taking it today, when should I start noticing something? Because we tend to be kind of an immediate gratification society. I want to take it today, and I want to feel great by this time tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily going to happen with DIHEXA.
No, it's a slow onset. And think about that whole metaphor of Rome wasn't built in a day. We want to rebuild the body and take something like this that's supplemental. But I would always caution anyone, when things work very, very quickly, what else is it doing, right, inside the body? And I'm not saying there aren't things that work really quickly that aren't great. Just saying I like to work with my body's physiology. So the concept of DIHEXA is to do something that our BDNF, or our brain-derived neurotropic factors, would do in healing inflammation in the brain. It's 7 times more potent. I don't know if I want it quicker than that, because it takes 2 to 4 weeks, right, to grow a progenitor cell, which is basically a descendant of a stem cell. And remember, stem cells differentiate into specific cells, okay? So not to nerd out, just want you to know the difference here. So when we're making a new nerve connection, or a neuroglial communication, right, when we're getting back that synapse and the dendrites and everything grows out, in order to make that full and be active as an adult kind of neuron, it needs 2 to 4 weeks to make. So cortisol will stop that. Things in nature that if we keep inflaming the brain, it stops that. So DIHEXA gives us a fighting chance at 7 times more potency, right?
Wow.
So, of course, I believe it's effective. I know it's effective. But taking things that, maybe something will come out and it's 10 times more potent, and it doesn't have any side effects. But the good news with DIHEXA is there is no noticed side effect. It's just improvement in cognitive function. The only thing that some people say is they feel possibly less socially involved, right? But if you notice that, back your dose back down, okay? So take a little less. And
that might be okay. I mean, as I get older, I tend to be less socially involved anyway.
It's okay.
I kind of don't like people.
If you want to be focused, yeah. I mean, I think it's a good thing too. People that have a form of, I call it adult onset or adult derived, ADD, and maybe they had it as a kid, but they still have it. And they're the type who will interrupt an email because someone's calling them, whereas most of us will continue our email and call that person back. They'll continue their task.
Interesting.
If there's someone who notices interruptions while taking this, back it down, right? Or maybe you take more. You just have to play with it. Find out what works for you. Because I know people that take certain Adderall medications, as an example, right? And sometimes it's good for them, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be good for you. So assuming DIHEXA is good for you, and it should be, you just got to find your dose.
Is it something, once we feel better, right? I mean, one of the things, like the first time I ever got on HRT therapy, the gentleman that prescribed it for me, he said, you're now married to two things. You're married to your spouse, you're married to your therapy, right? And you're going to do it forever, right? Does this kind of go the same way, or is this something like once somebody feels better, they can come off of it now, or, cycle on off? I mean, talk about longevity, or can we do this forever?
You could potentially. I mean, there's no data to say people have been on this for 10 years, okay, yet. But I will say that most cycle it on and off, just because of cost effectiveness too. You want to take it as needed. You could take it sporadically throughout the year to, again, regenerate what you're losing.
Okay. And
so kind of keep yourself at, we'll call it even bay. You can do it if you yourself have suffered a lot of traumatic brain injury, or if you did a contact sport and you had a few concussions in your lifetime. This is something you should probably do to get ahead of the incidence of, like I said, dementia, because mild cognitive disruption, right, and loss, if you're noticing your short-term memory, again, is being lost, right, or you're losing efficacy of that in your own body, you're at a 10 to 15% increase incident report of having a dementia.
Wow.
So, and I don't know anyone nowadays that can't say their short-term memory isn't affected somewhat.
Right.
So if we know that 10 to 15% of us who are losing short-term memory are potentially going to have a form of dementia, I think everyone could take this. I think everyone should take this. If you're a hard worker, you balance a lot in life, you have a travel work schedule, and so these stressors, making a plane, got to rush across town to make this meeting, I land now, I got delayed here, right? All these things that put stress on you, DIHEXA would be great. So,
realizing that we're not going to see this immediate result we all love, right? Safe to say that if somebody wants to now, if they're down the road and they're having these severe symptoms, it might be a little different deal. Now we really have to play with it and determine what's the best dosage and how long do we have to be on it. But for somebody who wants to take it as a preventative, proactive measure, what I'm hearing you say is you probably want to give it a good 3 months.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, look, this is not a 30-day thing, and then it's not working for me. Let me get rid of it, right? No. So, it's not a very expensive, product by any means. But that being said, you really need to think about at least a 3-month commitment before you're really going to see really any effect at all, I guess, right?
I don't think this is expensive for the benefit at all.
Right.
I don't know many things that can guarantee improved cognitive function and regrowth in brain cell.
Well, yeah, true.
So,
and we tend to lose a lot of brain cells in our younger years.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to put back on. So, I think for a maintenance phase of someone, if they wanted to take higher doses at times and then back down to 10 milligrams, they could potentially stay on year round. Again, there's not really noticed side effects with this. It's a good thing to do for your body, and because we have that inflammation up top, and the brain is, think about it, you got one brain, you got one heart, right? You got to protect these things.
Amen.
And at the end of the day, if I lost an arm, I got a backup, right? But I don't have a backup brain, and I want to protect that at all costs. And I truly value my cognitive function. I value being able to have conversations with people and carry on in detail.
Yeah.
So for me, DIHEXA, I think it's a must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you too. I mean, even for the loved ones too, right? I mean, I watched. I think I may have told you, but my father passed 2 years ago, and he lived with Parkinson's and Parkinson's dementia for about 14 years. And at the end, it progressed into what's called Lewy body dementia. And while we really felt clearly bad for him, and you could see everything that you described as you're describing all this, I'm thinking, yeah, that was my dad. That was my dad. That was the last conversation I had with him. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. But then you also look at the family. Right, how it affects the family and the stress that it put on my mom, you know, who fortunately she's still around. She's with us today. But I mean, you know, I've never seen her go through so much stress and work so hard, you know, and they were in their twilight years, man. This is not what they wanted their twilight years to look like, man. But he really, to be totally candid, did not take care of himself. And he didn't, of course, this wasn't around necessarily back then either. But all that is to say that we have to think about ourselves, but we also have to think about the burden and stress we may be putting on our loved ones too if we don't take care of ourselves and if we're not at the top of our game. So something that we can do, I know we have to wrap here in a minute. First of all, not just for men, women can take it. I know we're focusing on men's health today because it is November, but good for women too?
Great for women.
Okay.
Great for all. Great for all. Non-selective.
Okay. Because a lot of high-performing women in this world too, and so something that they would certainly benefit from.
I would argue they're stressed even at home.
Yeah.
If they're not in the workplace, you know, balancing
That's a good
kids
point.
and you name it. I think you and I have both had the luxury of being stuck, you know, kids without the woman helping, and I got to say, I don't know how they do it sometimes. So, you know.
Well, or another way of saying it is, we have a little bit of the luxury of compartmentalizing, right? So we'll go to work and we'll perform, you know, at a really high function, let's say, and maybe it's a really stressful day, or maybe we're just really upset. We have the luxury of coming home, turning off the TV, and just zoning out into this one area, and the house could burn down around us, and we kind of don't care, right? But yeah, my wife doesn't have this. She'll go and do her whatever she does during the day. I don't even know what she does during the day.
Yeah,
but you
Target.
know, maybe, you know, or whatever it is. I mean, she runs a painting business, and so you know, all that can be really stressful. But then she comes home and she begins to take on the stress of our son. And did he do his homework? And did he do it right? And what are we going to eat tonight? And the house is really dirty. And you know, and I'm not thinking about those things, man. I'm just thinking about, wow, the Simpsons are on. I think I'm just going to sit back for a little bit, you know. So yeah, no, that's a very good point. That's a very, very good point. So, and something too, we don't need to do, or I guess I should ask, are there any contraindications for this? In other words, can we take it while we're on our HRT therapy?
Absolutely.
Anything we should avoid?
Absolutely. If you're on any other psychosocial drug of sorts, right? If you're being prescribed an antidepressant, if you're being prescribed something for sleep, etc., we don't know the interruptions in that, right? So I would say consult with your physician, right? Consult with your provider and follow their plan, because nothing's guaranteed. But we're not aware of any, because if anything, some of the elected meds you might be prescribed, they might be causing some form of brain damage or inflammation. And so this is a good thing to take alongside it, potentially. But always consult your physician with things like that. And as far as taking it alongside TRT, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
So that sounds like a resounding yes.
For sure. Yeah,
Great.
Everyone can do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. Well, this has been really good information today, man. I know we can keep going, but we got some other stuff we got to do. So, folks, if you want to learn about DIHEXA and the other products that we have, I encourage you to go to www.elitehealthonline.com. Click the Book Now button, or there's several different options that we have to just gather some more information. We'll be happy to get in contact with you. Again, www.elitehealthonline.com. Get hooked up with one of our providers. We will order some lab work on you. Have this conversation about DIHEXA, mental health, more coming on that topic in a couple of months as well. And then the vast array of other products that we have, too, from such good partners like we have with Shane and his company. So go visit us today online, and we'll see you next time at the Elite Health and Wellness Show. Thank you.